On Sunshine's Table Talk, hanging out with Leah this morning, and we are tackling some big conversations today. I don't know if you saw last night, but journalist Stan Grant had his last Q&A as he was stepping down after being really bombarded by a whole lot of racism and horrible comments and things and attacks on his health and his family on social media as well. Especially, it's been going on for a while, but especially after he was a part of the coronation panel when King Charles was appointed as king. And if you did miss out on it, it was absolutely, it's moving stuff, and we're going to play a short snippet from it now.
Many of you would know by now that I'm stepping away for a little while. Sometimes we need to just take time out. Sometimes our souls are hurting, and so it is for me. I've had to learn that endurance is not always strength. Sometimes strength is knowing when to say stop. And to those who have sent messages of support, thank you so much. But I'll be okay. Please send that support and care to those of my people and all people who feel abandoned and alone, who are wondering whether they have a place in this country.
That audio from ABC's Q&A last night. And joining me now on the line, I have Professor Bronwyn Carlson, who is from Macquarie University in the Department of Indigenous Studies, the Director of the Centre for Global Indigenous Future and the Managing Editor of Journal of Global I'm not going to say I can't say it right. I'm sorry, Bronwyn. Welcome to Table Talk. Now, tell me how I say the Journal of Global
Indigeneity.
Indigeneity. That's right. I was like, the E and the I, I'm getting confused. Thank you so much for joining me on Table Talk this morning. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me on.
Look, obviously, Stan Grant stepping down last night it was a huge thing. His speech was quite moving, and I think, anyone who has watched it, I don't think there was, the dry eye or not, you can't not feel anything. Have you had a chance to watch his speech, and what are your thoughts and how are you feeling about the whole situation?
I have had a chance to watch the speech. I know I'm operating on a different time zone, being over here in Toronto at the moment. Look, it was really heartfelt, and Stan has a fabulous way of relaying these kind of emotions and feelings to the broader public. He's done some emotional speeches over his career. But when you say that, it would be hard to not have a dry eye or hard to not show some empathy. You'd be surprised with the kind of kickback from some of the people we've seen on social media, which is, of course, the very point why Stan is stepping down and why, we did the research with Media Diversity Australia, because of the horrific nature of the experiences of some people across social media platforms.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose that's really what I want to talk to you about, is that research in Media Diversity Australia. What has been, we sort of know what the findings will be, but I think sometimes they're even worse than what we may presume. Can you talk to me about some of the findings from the report?
Yeah, look, it was a little bit along those lines that we sort of had some sort of prediction of what the landscape might be like. I've been researching Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people's engagements across digital platforms for a few years now, so I have a bit of an idea, but it was really interesting to speak to journalists who were not only Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander. We also spoke to people who were culturally and racially marginalised, but also people who had other identified in other ways, like maybe with a disability or maybe LGBTQI plus. And so some people, inhabited three of those kind of cohorts, others two, some one. And so it was a whole range of people who might be considered diverse in terms of who they are, or not mainstream, or non-white, non-hetero male, really, is the whole element. So some of those stories were pretty horrific, what people have to put up with, and you can see that yourself by just, strolling by something like the speech that Standard, for example. You can see the comments. I've seen all sorts of derogatory things leveled at Stan, and the truth is that for women and the LGBTQI community, specifically, it's even worse.
Yeah, wow.
So this stuff is really it's so personal, it's relentless. And sometimes, which was one of the most horrifying sort of reveals, was that it's not always just online, that for a number of our participants, the kind of harassment, stalking, trolling, abuse was offline as well into people's everyday. And, some media outlets try and combat the kind of racism that they expect. Like, for example, the conversation might turn off the comments when it comes to Indigenous author, and that's pretty telling, right? That you've even got to do that. If it's an Indigenous author, you have to turn the comments off because you already know, like you're already preempting that that's going to be awful. But the problem is that some of those people then track down whoever the author was or the journalist is, and it starts harassing them in their workplace or in their actual personal life. So it doesn't actually stop it. It just makes it move into a different direction. So, the whole thing about this whole situation, there seems to be a big focus on Stan Grant, and he has a great platform, has been a great journalist for over 40 years, has done all the hard yards and has suffered immensely due to racism. But this is a structural and an industry issue. This is about our society that we live in.
Yeah.
It's not just, pointing fingers at the ABC, for example, or whoever happens to be employed and is, in a particular, outlet. This is society is the problem.
Yeah.
The sewer that Stan's talking about is the absolute foundations of this country based on racism and its hatred towards Indigenous people. And it's outrageous.
It really is, and I think my privilege is always checked when things like this happen, because I think it's so easy. Obviously, as I'm a white straight female, so I can easily, go into my little funnel, and my privilege is the fact that I don't think of it until something comes up, and it's something that I'm working on, and I really implore every person that's in a similar category as me to do that. But you don't know that. It's systemic. And Bronwyn, I'd love to get your further thoughts around sort of that topic of how do we even diversify journalism in the first place, because there are obviously so many calls to do that, but then it seems like we're sort of banging our head against the wall, and that change it's all talk but no action.
Yeah, most definitely. Look, Media Diversity Australia, previous to the report that we did, did a report on who gets to tell Australian stories. And from that, they said we really need to be much more diverse in who we have reporting on Australian stories, that it's primarily white men in that space. And so, from that report, it was a bit of a wake-up call for, industries and organisations to say, oh, let's look around our newsroom. Everyone is white. Everyone's a dude. We need to think about this more broadly. And so, then there starts this, let's get some, journalists who are Aboriginal, Torres Strait, culturally, racially marginalised and, queer or whatever. We'll get all these people who are not that.
Yes.
But there's no thought into, well, then how do we ensure the safety of this cohort of people who are going to come under attack? And they have done. And so that's the report that we produced, was looking at, okay, you've brought in some diverse journalists, not many. I mean, the landscape is still fairly one colour.
Yeah.
Brought in a few people and just left them to it. And like the people we spoke to said, that they were unofficially or officially told that, it's going to get ugly. You'll probably get harassed. There's lots of violence. This is just acceptable. And people are just expected that to take this on, this extra load of trauma and racism as just to have a job.
And I mean, journalists...
Sorry.
I was just going to say, journalism is already such a heavy and intense job and occupation on its own. You're already doing so much deep diving, then let alone to worry about your own safety and threats on top of you just trying to do your job. And I think that point around safety is just so pivotal. Is there any recommendations that you've come through from the report of things that we could change or things that we could add, or does it come down to education and just getting that truth telling out there? What is there solutions in this sort of area?
Yeah. Look, truth telling is obviously a key one, and of course, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have been calling for this for a very long time. That the truth of the Australian history, so that's from 1788 onwards, is told in a truthful way where people can understand, and they understand the cost to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and the cost that we continue to bear. But, we don't see that happening. We don't see that at all. And every time there are slight moves towards having a better understanding of what's taken place and carries on, this is not historical, this is like still contemporary.
Yes.
Deaths in custody, child removals, the hatred, and we can see that just by this circumstance. The hatred is still all very relevant, very real, and very out there. These are OH&S issues, though, in workplaces, right? Like you have a right to go to work and be safe in your workplace and not suffer violence and harassment on a daily basis. So that needs to be looked at for one. So how do we do that to keep people safe in their workplace? Because that's just a right that you have. But there are other things too. And I was looking at a tweet the other day that Amy Macquarie put out and said, maybe it's about creating Black media. Maybe we need our own. And I can see that, in lots of circumstances, Indigenous people have created their own kind of industry to step outside of mainstream and do things differently.
Yeah.
And there has been, of course, there's been Indigenous journalism and media for a long time, but maybe it's time we left. Like, there's something really strong and wonderful about refusal and to not participate in something that brings you harm.
Absolutely. And I think the businesses that are a part of, and I think one thing that I really hope the ABC in particular does around this story is really looks at the way that it is treating their staff, and it is responding to sort of situations like this as well. We're almost out of time, but Bronwyn, I'd love if you have any other big insights that you have taken away from your report that you would love to share, or anything to just kind of close this, because obviously, I mean, it's a massive topic. It's not going away just because it's out of the media cycle. So yeah, I guess anything that you really have that was interesting to you from the report, and yeah, what we can even do, because it can feel monumental sometimes.
A lot of, people spoke about how wonderful it was to actually see people like them in the workplace too. So often if it was just say an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander person, for example, they're generally the only one there. So, this idea of just hiring one and that person to be left, alone and have no support systems was another big issue as well. But it is a bigger issue. It's not going to be solved by hiring more Indigenous people and leaving them to their own devices. It's not going to be solved by, pointing out that there's racism on social media. This is societal, got to begin with truth telling. And this country needs to come to terms with the fact that they are innately racist and they need to really address that before we can move forward to have a more shared future together.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a great closing point to make as well, that we just need to face our demons, unfortunately, and that is that we are a racist country. And that's a hard pill for a lot of people to swallow.
Shows you've grown up.
Yeah, exactly.
Shows we've grown up.
Exactly. Hey, thank you so much, Professor Bronwyn. I really appreciate your time and insights this morning. It's been really wonderful to talk to you.
All right, thank you.